Good evening. Welcome to Dare Live. My name's Charlie Tesh, and tonight we're talking about Jesus and how Jesus might relate to our situations in the modern world and our lives. With me tonight is who's becoming a regular guest on our show, Michael Coran, philosopher, poet, and religious student, and all of that stuff. Michael, welcome to our show.
Oh, thank you, Charlie.
Happy to be here with you.
I'm happy to be here with you.
So you're from a Jewish family that was not very religious, I guess.
Totally unreligious.
Totally unreligious,
Yep.
okay. But you managed to live in this country for the first 22 years and be relatively oblivious of Jesus, this character.
Yes.
And then you started to learn about him, and apparently that made a fairly large impression on you.
Yes.
Why don't you describe a little bit how that happened?
Good. I might have told you this. So when I was in high school, we had a teacher, Mrs. Harkness, a widow, and she did what might not be allowed in high school nowadays. She took our English class to Pendle Hill, Pennsylvania, from Queens, New York City.
A field trip.
A field trip, retreat, and Pendle Hill is a retreat center for Quakers.
Okay.
I had never heard of them.
You'd never heard of Quakers?
Not then, no.
Really?
No.
Wow. Okay.
And we go there, and it's and it's nice. It's the whole class, and all the girls in the class can be with them for the weekend. And we sit on hard benches. I'd never seen a Quaker meeting house. Very, very simple. Even simpler than the set, hard as it is to imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
These would be benches, not chairs.
I've been to one Quaker meeting, and yes, you're absolutely right. Hard benches.
Yeah, no pictures.
It makes you very aware that you're sitting on this bench.
Yes. And we were told by someone in flannel shirt, rolled up sleeves, speaking to these young high school students. He says something like, as Quakers, we believe there's an inner light in everybody. And we call it, he says, and we call it God. We call that inner light God shining through, because we're all connected to the universe. We're all chips off the old cosmic block.
Right.
And he said,
Not to mention all of our shared genes and wiring and all the rest
yes,
of it.
it all comes. It took 13.8 billion years to make you and Susan and Nobi, who are helping with this show, and Ricardo.
Yep.
And it was really worth the wait.
Well, for us maybe, but for a lot of other animals, maybe not so much.
Well, yeah, we might be reluctant to have a primary, including polar bears and giraffes.
Yeah.
But fortunately, that hasn't happened yet. So, and then he says, so we sit in silence, and if anyone's moved to the spirit, which he doesn't define, it could be the spirit of all of us sitting together, the spirit connected to the Quakers who have sat on these benches before. But if the spirit moves you, then you speak, and then you shut up when the spirit is no longer moving you. And I didn't say anything. I don't think anyone in the class, I don't think, said anything.
Were you tempted to say anything?
I wasn't then, no.
Because in my experience, it is tempting to say something. I mean, you're kind of like rummaging around, in your head.
You're not supposed to, though.
You're not supposed to rummage around?
No, you're supposed to wait until something more than the ordinary Charlie moves through you. You believe in that too, right? Something more than your usual consciousness.
Well, yes. So I was kind of looking for that, trying to find it while I was sitting there on that hard bench.
Oh, I see.
It's
like
supposed to there must be something there.
Yeah, you could be open to it more than looking.
Right.
Invite it.
Yes.
Walk when the Spirit says walk. Talk when the Spirit, I think there's an old spiritual.
I don't think my technique was really the best.
No, but you were a beginner.
I was just there for
we understand. We understand.
Yes.
So I didn't think much. It was very nice, and that was my weekend with the Quakers, and I never went back. When I went away to graduate school, University of Chicago, I was lonelier than usual. Growing up at home, I was lonely, but I had the people around me who had helped make me lonely. So it felt a little comfortable. I was comfortable loneliness.
Yeah.
The University of Chicago, my supporting cast was gone, and I was really lonely. And I went to Quaker meeting, perhaps just to be with people. I don't know even why. And then I started.
But you weren't like personally invited by someone?
I don't think so. It might have been the calendar of events for
Yeah.
at the university.
It was just the idea somehow.
Of being with people and not alone.
Right.
And the silence is comforting.
So you got something at least out of that
First,
meeting
yes,
that you
yes,
went to
huge.
that was appealing.
And then I started experiencing something you might be sympathetic with, a voice and a presence inside that was different than I had identified as who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And they would encourage this. And I eventually, this voice and spirit began to be present to me more and more, since I was very lonely and very scared. And if I went out with when I went out with a woman, Gracia Faye Bauman, and was very scared for many reasons, and my voice would say to me, hold her hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have confidence. You know, I mean, if I was really together, the Beatles were coming soon, I want to hold your hand, and it would be me, but I was too scared for that. So I was told, hold her hand, and I held it.
But this wasn't in a Quaker meeting that you were hearing this.
No.
This was like
afterwards, during the week.
In real time.
Yes, but I was more and more.
When you were with her.
Yes.
Okay.
And then another, just whatever to do, I was really lost.
Yeah. But somehow you were calm enough
to hear this.
to hear that, even though you were.
Even if I'm frantic, I would say, what should I do? What should I do? And then I would be told, really, simple things, what to eat. Or, I mean, I was really lost and confused, alone at the university. And so this was extremely comforting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think of it as God. I
Yeah.
just thought of it as, at least there's something. I didn't even question it too much. I should have. I was studying philosophy. Just that there was something guiding me to get through the day, which is very helpful. So that was the beginning of my, you could call it, spiritual experience.
Right. But at that point, you still didn't know Jesus or had thought about that
No,
much?
no,
or anything?
not really at all, even though that's the heart of Quaker meeting, but they didn't emphasize it.
Jesus is at the heart of Quaker meeting?
This particular meeting, which was called, I think, the 56th or 57th Street meeting, because that's where it was in Hyde Park in Chicago, once had a vote whether they wanted to disassociate themselves from the Bible
Oh, yeah.
and from Jesus and just be a group that meets and feels the spirit of the group or the spirit of the whatever you want to call it. And they voted against that. They wanted to be connected to their tradition.
Right, and that is the Quaker tradition.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
George Fox, who started it, you probably don't know this,
Probably not.
well, in England, this was, when Protestantism was spreading, people were finding their own relationship to God. And George Fox, among other things, would go into churches when England was fighting their wars, which, any empire has their wars, and say in the middle of the service, there's blood on your hand. In the middle of the service, there's blood. Look at your hands. There's blood. See the blood. They put him in prison.
Naturally.
They put him in prison. And his wife
Yeah.
in prison.
What were the charges? Do you happen to remember?
Certainly disturbing the peace, among other things. And I mean, and certainly in some ways maybe, as even in this country during World War I, for sure,
Yeah.
Eugene Victor Debs was put in prison for saying don't fight World War I.
I think I don't remember quite the details now, but Eugene Debs was actually in prison during an election when he was running for president.
Yes,
I believe.
when he was put
Right?
in prison, he ran for president.
Yeah, and he got a huge number of
Yes,
votes.
way over 1 million votes.
Yeah. Okay, but that's off the subject.
But Woodrow Wilson, the university professor, put him in prison
Yeah,
because the World War I was a funny war. We really didn't belong in it.
yeah.
And
We
Eugene
probably
Debs,
didn't belong in any of them.
yeah, Eugene Victor Debs said don't.
Yeah.
And Warren Harding, of all people, pardoned him.
Okay. All right.
In between poker games.
So
Maybe he lost.
All right. I don't want to get too far afield
Yes,
because
yeah.
the last time we tried this, we really didn't talk much about Jesus at
Okay,
all.
yes.
So the Quakers started out as a kind of revolutionary movement then.
Yes, and they were excited. They went around the world saying, everyone, God is not just someone you read in the Bible or someone you believe in, you can experience. They were mystics. And they were called Quakers because they were like the modern day Pentecostals. They would quake. They would really quake. You wouldn't get up and speak in this kind of language we're using now.
Yeah.
I would know I was moved by the Spirit if it was shaking or quaking out of me.
Right. And how did that get started as an actual movement or religion kind of thing?
I mean, they just went around and it was just very contagious, telling people we could, as the Pentecostals do now, you can have you don't have to believe. You can have an experience of healing, an experience of God coming to these meetings and inviting yourself to shake words out of you and healing out of you and something divine that's in you, let it out.
And this is completely contrary to the dominant religions, right? Where the word comes from God via the priest or the minister or whatever.
Not the original Jesus movement. These people, Pentecost happened after Jesus, or I like to call him Jeshua, his Jewish name. 50 days after he was crucified, his students were gathered together in a room and felt the wind coming through the room and also began to speak in tongues. Or speak in, maybe in Quaker language, speak in sounds and words they didn't understand came out of them. Some people thought they were drunk.
Or crazy.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it was extremely freeing and healing to them.
Right. And that's, I'm sure, how the Quakers felt.
Yes.
But it is totally contrary to the usual religious structure.
That after,
that I understand.
It wasn't contrary to the Pentecostal early Christians.
No.
But eventually it
but
gets...
for the last 2,000
years,
of
from
organized
time to time
religion.
people move back to it.
Yeah.
As you can see in America now. I mean, you can go to a Pentecostal meeting near where I live in Cambridgeport, and for the first half hour or more, people will roll on the floor and yell and cry to Jesus and just cry out their feelings in public, and can often feel very relieved and very comforted and maybe even very healed psychologically and maybe other ways.
So it sounds like you've been to these meetings.
Yes.
And how do they affect you? Do you end up rolling on the floor? And
I did. My friend did. My friend was, you can be slain in the Spirit. And
what does that mean?
That means a minister will put his hand on your head for healing. There's a place in Waltham, the stigmaticists. These are monks who want to feel the crucifixion of Jeshua in their own body. And they will, the last Tuesday of every month, they will have a Catholic healing service. And the priest and some of his helpers will put his hand on anyone's forehead who wants. And my friend Judy fell to the floor. I felt extremely touched by it. I don't think it healed me, but wow. I was diagnosed with sinus cancer, and the priest put his hand right there, and that felt extraordinary.
Did you ever consider going back?
I went back once more, and it also felt extraordinary again. But I don't think it healed me, but I think proton beam therapy might have had a little more success. I'm not so sure how much either.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you think there would be hope if you kept going back, that it would have a healing effect?
If I felt that, I would be back. I mean, it certainly could be helpful. I would much rather spend my Tuesday evenings talking with you.
I don't know how healing that'll be.
It might be very healing.
Okay, so back at the University of Chicago now, you went to the Quaker meeting.
Yes.
And so that opened you up to the idea and some of the feeling and whatever of the Spirit
Yes.
being part of you. And then what happened after that?
Well, I'm living with a roommate, a lovely man named Charlie Hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still, even with the help of the Spirit, still a very scared, lonely young man. And he had in his bookshelf, I would only meet him in the kitchen. To meet him in the living room was too much for me to handle. So I could meet him over food.
Okay.
But when he was gone,
But just because of your own insecurity?
yeah,
or
my own
whatnot?
insecurities. Talking to Charlie, who's, people named Charlie means manly and virtuous.
Oh, terrific.
Yep. And so he had in his bookshelf a book called Fear and Trembling, Sickness unto Death.
It was starting to sound like a Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas or something
yes,
like
this
that.
was, Soren Kierkegaard was about a century before that.
Yeah.
And Fear and Trembling is about Abraham hearing a voice calling him to sacrifice his son.
That would cause a lot of fear and trembling.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And according to Kierkegaard, he had the faith to believe, even though it sounded absurd,
Mm-hmm.
to do this. He thought there was something coming out of him more than rational that Abraham should follow.
Mm-hmm.
Poor Kierkegaard believed it himself. He was engaged to someone who was much younger than him, 14, and he was in his young 20s. And he broke the engagement, even though he loved her. Her name was Regina, following what he felt was the Spirit. And unfortunately, I didn't read his biography carefully enough. 2 years later, he wanted to get back with her, but she was engaged to someone else. So
She probably did the right thing.
yes, he might have. He eventually was buried next to her. He
Really?
always loved her. He never married anyone.
Wow.
Too lonely like me at the University of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I didn't read that carefully enough. When I was going out with someone and it got scary for me, a young woman, I also said, inspired by Kierkegaard, let my fears confuse me, and I felt moved to say, I want you to grow up, without my influence.
Mm-hmm.
And sadly broke up the relationship for a while,
Yeah.
only for a while.
And then what changed?
She eventually, I still kept her in my heart, and she eventually came to visit me when I went to Israel to find out the root of this Quaker spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Where did it comes from? Judaism. Jeshua is a Jew. And I eventually went to live in Israel, and she came and stayed with me for 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I got to know her, and we weren't quite for each other, but it was at least helped break my fantasy.
So, in pursuit of the Spirit, you went to Israel.
But before that, I jumped ahead just to tell you about Barbara. But
Okay.
after Fear and Trembling, I met a man who was a professor who was eventually going to be a priest.
Mm-hmm.
And told him, it was so nice, an older professor interested in me. He was interested in me more than just to be friends. I didn't know that then.
Okay.
And I probably, in unconscious ways, encouraged people to be with me by flirting with older people. And it was much my doing as his.
So you're still looking for a good parent?
Yes, especially alone at the University of Chicago.
Yeah.
And
Which is a good place, because there's a lot of the professors and people who are on staff, I imagine, at University of Chicago, have a lot to offer in terms of parenting types of interactions.
Actually, he was not on the faculty there. He taught at DePaul University.
Okay.
And no, the University of Chicago was more the life of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
Professors were not particularly interested in caring for you as people, but caring for your mind.
Okay, well, we'll let that one lie, I think.
Yes.
You could talk about that for quite a
But
while.
my friend, we'll call him
Paul.
Ken, or Paul. Paul, we'll call him Paul. My friend helped me. He said, you're not just talking to yourself when you hear this voice. It's not just part of you. You could, like Abraham, have a watch line. There were watch lines then, were like you could have a long distance service for little money. You could have a special telephone line to God.
Mm-hmm.
And I was this scared, lonely kid, and I could either be a scared, lonely kid talking to myself, or, wow, I could be having God communicate with me.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't too thoughtful. I mean, why would God be concerned with whether I hold your hand or not, but with all the things going on in the world?
Well, I mean, a quick answer is that God is, omniscient and omnipotent, and has a mind that incorporates everything in the universe.
It includes that.
And so would certainly include you.
And want me to grow,
and whatever.
Want me to grow and get in
so
touch.
if that model for God were, accurate in some way, then it's completely possible.
Yeah, perhaps if I had been thoughtful enough, or you would have been my friend then, that would have been a wonderful explanation. But it was very, very freeing.
Mm-hmm.
Hugely freeing. I mean, there's lots of downsides, but it meant that what I heard, I would do. I wouldn't be bound by convention.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to hug someone, I would. If I wanted to be quiet in social settings and not talk at all, if my parents came to visit, I didn't want to talk to them at a meal, I'd be quiet. It could be highly infuriating and very freeing, and I wasn't concerned, for better and worse, with the impact of what I did.
Uh-huh.
I was just following the Spirit.
Right. So you had some security from that.
Very, very security. And my priest friend encouraged me to try Catholic Mass.
Mm-hmm.
Priest. And there I saw this Jewish boy in suffering. And the belief is, and this is Easter week,
mm-hmm.
that he would eventually get over his suffering,
mm-hmm.
get off the cross, and after Easter Sunday, Joshua goes around and just says, hey, we'd like to have a cup of coffee. He's really very relaxed, and none of this. And before, if you asked him for a drink, he'd say, verily, verily, and give you a wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
After the crucifixion, often he just says, hey, any fish for supper?
And from those relatively small amount of reading I did, after he was crucified and resurrected, or disappeared anyway from the cave they had put him in, he appeared to a number of his former disciples,
students, yes,
and who were in different places, at roughly the same time.
Yes,
right.
About the 40 days or so after
mm-hmm.
I like to call it the revival.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I carefully studied it, especially after living in Israel for 3 years, I wanted to bring it down to earth,
mm-hmm.
and have a Jewish perspective on this Jewish teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed clear to me that when he was crucified, that, I think we talked about this, you usually die of asphyxiation after 2 or 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And he was taken off after maybe 6 hours, 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And most probably, or at least possibly, was not, he might have even been brain dead, but could be revived.
Mm-hmm.
And a rich man named Nicodemus, I believe, wrapped him in linen cloth and took him in the cave, rather than often people who were crucified after 2 or 3 days are thrown to the dog, literally to the dogs.
Right. Well, when they took him down, they took the other guys down too, who were crucified with them, I believe.
I don't know if they took them down at the same time. You might know.
Well, that was my impression.
I don't think so.
They took them down at the same time, and they broke their legs to find out if they were really dead. That was their test.
They didn't do that with...
And no, they didn't do it to Jesus.
They just stabbed him in the side.
Yep. And so he might well have gotten away with still being alive.
Yes, and then revive, and the reason, just the different word revive means that it's wonderful that this happened to him,
mm-hmm.
And there's hope for all of us. It's not just a one person resurrected, but we can all, when we're feeling dead, there's possibilities, especially with the help of our friends, maybe a wealthy friend who can care for us. There's possibilities of revival for us all, which is not really too different from the Christian teaching, because we're supposed to really identify with the crucifixion and identify with the resurrection.
Well, the whole thing is, once you die, you're going to go to heaven if you've been a good person in your life, right?
That's one way of doing it, but another would be
But that's the general Christian way of doing it, I think.
Some Christians, many Christians would say that, but another possibility is, as you might agree, that when you have these near-death experiences, when life is despair and depressing, you can be revived and life can feel very, very delicious in comparison with what you went through.
Certainly.
Or feel like, I mean, Yeshua also said, the kingdom of heaven is here.
Which is, wow, that's a huge topic.
Yes. But
The
it is
kingdom of
here
heaven
right
is
now
here.
with our audience and us and Susan and Nobi on the cameras and Ricardo this is it, folks.
Well, yes, and so you should make the most of it while you're here,
Yes.
and do your best to have it work out the way it might in heaven.
Yes. Or according to Yeshua, this is heaven.
Yes.
I mean, heaven is just the skies. This is just the word for heaven in Hebrew is shemayim, which means skies. And so the sky is literally even in this closed room. The air is here. So the community of the skies is here with us.
But are you saying that, excuse me, the idea of going to heaven is that there's a life that continues on after you leave the earth?
Yes.
And are these complementary ideas to each other?
Yes.
The idea of resurrection while you're still alive on earth, but then you can be resurrected.
Yes, my own take on that, just to go back a little, is he goes into Jerusalem, Yeshua, like Bernie Sanders, and they greet him, Hosanna, King of the Jews. It's Palm Sunday, which was last Sunday, and he walks on palms, and they're really cheering like they do at Bernie's revival meetings. But it's as it is now, very dangerous then, more dangerous to call yourself the King of the Jews, or to be called that. That's sedition. King Herod does not like that.
It wasn't, excuse me, Jesus' idea to be called that, was it?
Well,
did he consider himself to be the King of the Jews?
That's a great question. When he was asked at his trial, he said, "You said it."
Yeah.
So he didn't deny it, but he didn't affirm it. I like to see it as a nonviolent revolution, basically. I mean, I think he hoped that, if everyone joined, like if everyone joins Bernie, then Bernie will be president. And if he hoped, or if not Bernie, the people that follow Bernie in the next election, like Bernie has just taken Occupy and made it way more known around the world.
Oh, yeah.
So Jeshua is starting this, and really starting this nonviolent revolution. Love your enemies. Huge. Who would have ever thought of that? Love your enemies. Love your neighbor as you love, and the translation of neighbor, a better one, is love those who are near you the way you love yourself. Those are huge things he was saying. He tells his students, "Did you visit me when I was in prison?" You know this, right?
You told me this before.
Oh, did you? Yes. And
Go
they said, "We never saw you in prison." And he said, "Anybody who's there, that's me." He was really able to be every man, or every person.
Right.
He was able to, somehow with his own traumas in his life, which were many, he was able to get through them and realize I'm a human being just like other human beings. And I can feel for everyone.
Well, in the Bible, I noticed that he's called a lot of different names. Sometimes he's the Son of God. Sometimes he's the Son of Man. he has these different roles or names, which I guess are in association with maybe the particular situation or how he's acting at a certain time, maybe. You think that's true?
Yes.
So that kind of sets him up as a role model, right? If we all experience some of the same things that he experienced, then we can try to deal with things maybe the way he dealt with them, or try to look to him for inspiration on how to deal with things.
Yes, he was good enough a teacher to say, greater things will be done by my students than I have done.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone once runs up to him and says, you're a good man, you tell us what to do to be a good person. He says, I'm not good. There's only one good being in the world. That's the collective community of divinity that we're all part of.
Mm-hmm. But still, I guess what I was trying to say before is that he's the Son of God, and so he's in touch with this voice or whatever it is that he used to communicate.
In the Hebrew Bible, we're all children of God. So to be a son of God is not like I'm the one and only Son of God in the Hebrew Bible. We're all children. There's songs you've heard.
Yeah.
Children. We're children of the Lord.
But in some sense, he was a special child.
As all of us are.
I mean, a more special child.
Well, I think he would. I think in his spirit, he would say, as he said about his students, "You'll do better things than I have done." Someone once came up to my father during a fireman's gathering. He was a fireman, and saw me with my dad, and the man said, "I hope your son will be as good a man as you are." And my father said, "If he's not a better man than I am not a good father."
Mm-hmm.
And Jeshua said the same.
Mm-hmm.
So if he's special, we're all even more special, thanks to his parenting and teaching.
But he was a unique individual in his perspective on a lot of things. I mean, like you say, no one was saying, love your enemy, things like that, right?
Yes, I think so.
So where did he get that idea? Did he get that idea from his father?
Yes.
Okay.
I've told you this.
Well, explain it a little more.
Again, I really think he got it from the unique way he was conceived and born.
From his earthly father?
Yes.
Okay.
As you know the story, his mother Miriam, it's her name, which means goddess of the sea. His mother Miriam is pregnant. She's engaged to this older man, Yosef, which means God will provide. And as soon as he sees her pregnant, he wants to break up the engagement. They were engaged.
Yeah.
And then he has...
Because it wasn't his kid.
No, it wasn't his kid. And that's hard for an old guy, hard for any man.
Yes.
And he then has this dream. And the dream says, she didn't just mess around with any old guy. She is pregnant with the Holy Spirit, in Hebrew, Ruach HaKodesh, a special spirit. You can marry her. I think inspired by his love for her, he has this dream. And so instead of condemning her or even forgiving her, he says, I now have this dream that what I thought was horrible and broke me up, I realize is really wonderful and special. And we can have a family together. And so from his father's taking something that seems to be sinful, or sin just means missing the mark, is from his father taking something that's horrible and traumatic and being able out of love to see the beauty and miracle in it. He got that from his dad, Joseph, and was able to do that with everybody.
And so you're thinking that somehow he picked up on that while he was in the womb?
Or even born, or even told by his mother
as he was like a young child,
yes,
maybe?
And finally getting, a chip off the old father's block.
Yeah.
He got this beyond forgiveness
Right.
from Joseph.
But that idea is filled with the idea of speciality, isn't it? I mean, his father is saying, well, this woman that I want to marry, she's not just been out carousing with other guys or something, but now she's infested with this spirit or
Yep.
whatever, right?
Yep.
And that's how this has come to be. Well, that's fairly unusual,
Yes,
right, that happens.
in some ways, although we could, there's a joke I think I'll hazard to tell you. Why was Jesus Jewish?
Okay, I give up.
He thought his mother was a virgin, and she thought he was a god.
Okay. But so getting back, though, to the idea of his self-conception,
Yep.
right? And whether he thought of himself as the potential or, a good candidate to be, or someone that you would want to have as the king of the Jews.
Yes.
Was he in fact thinking of himself in that way? That, I have these ideas and the
It's-
world would be better if I were the king.
It sounds like he never quite said it himself.
Mm-hmm.
His followers say it, as followers do. He must have thought of himself as, and I think he was, as Gandhi is, Mandela is, even Bernie, but Joshua maybe even more, as really being a new kind of human being, someone who would really see that what you think is sinful, which again means missing the mark,
Mm-hmm.
if you really be with it, this is a Buddhist technique too, if you really dwell with whatever what's in you or around,
Mm-hmm.
if you can find the beautiful, miraculous in it.
Mm-hmm. How do you know if you're on track, though? I mean, so you get these voices or intuitions or
Yes.
whatever, right?
Yep.
How do you know that
He
you're not
answered-
being led horribly astray?
Right. He answered that very directly, actually.
Jesus did?
He
Joshua?
said, by the fruits you will know them.
Okay, yeah. So if you do what you think is a good thing and it turns out really horrible,
Yes.
then
and
you know that you're wrong.
You probably missed it. Although it took a while, his nonviolent revolution, which he started against Rome,
Mm-hmm.
he won. Took him about 350 years, and
Mm-hmm.
The Roman Empire became Christian.
Yes.
So he won.
Well, maybe. My maybe throwing it in there is yes. Okay, so the Roman Empire became Christian.
Yep.
And evolved into the Catholic Church
Yep.
and all of its hierarchy and all of the things that it's done over the years. Was that really Jesus-ism? Did it really propagate? Did his messages of love your enemy actually become embodied in the church at the time?
I don't want to break this to you. Probably for some,
Uh-huh.
it's very hard to do that, but at least it kept it alive as a possibility.
Okay.
Yeah, through all the horrors of the church,
Mm-hmm.
the horrors of organized religion. Joshua was an opponent of organized religion.
Yeah.
He was
Yes.
as an opponent of also the political situation there.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted it to be born anew.
Right. All right. So one of his major accomplishments then was getting this religion started in a way
Yep.
and keeping him alive with us
Yes.
for the last couple thousand years.
Yes.
And then now he's still with us, and now he's with you, who didn't grow up with him at all,
Yep.
right? But had then a major impact on your life.
It's quite just lovely. I mean, to believe all these wonderful things, including, as you said earlier, that there is some kind of presence. As you had told me, there's all kinds of things coming through us that are beyond us. That there's probably life after this.
Mm-hmm.
You could have a friend who, when they're in trouble, says, just imagine there's a kind parent that is comforting you.
Yeah.
And in Christianity and Judaism and Christianity believes that there is, that the cosmos is way more caring and loving than we can imagine. That the sun makes us, the galaxy makes us, and if we really, really understood it, we could probably experience, as the Quakers said, some super consciousness, which even you might be open to, a consciousness way beyond our understanding that is more caring than we could even possibly imagine, and more loving, and more guiding.
Well, I certainly believe that that's there.
Yeah, wow.
I don't see it really dominating social life in this country and world right now.
Well, I mean, since when we were born, women were second-class citizens. Blacks were,
and they still are,
disabled, but way less so. Way less so. Gays were considered sinful. It's a huge. Central and South America were controlled by the United States and were dictatorships. China was impoverished. India was an English colony. So, with all the difficulties, there's been an immense amount of growth in human history that we're living through now.
Well, yes, there's been a lot of growth, but there's been a lot of what's the word? Recidivism.
That seems to be the way it works. But huge amounts.
Yeah. So it's constantly changing, and I don't think you can say that the United States, for example, is in general more enlightened than people were in the Middle Ages or any other time. Really, I mean, there's the spirit of whatever you want to call it, but like Jesus' spirit, I think has been around forever.
Yep.
And hopefully always will be.
Or the Christ spirit, if you want to.
Yes.
Even before him, the spirit that we're all part of, we're all one family, really.
Right.
Which is even from Adam and Eve, we're all come from the same parents and the same cosmic parent.
Right. So I don't really think that the world is going to change in a hugely significant way. Like, we're not going to get rid of wars, that kind of stuff. It's going to keep going on because we're human, and that's what humans are like. But how you treat each other in your daily life is a different story entirely, right? So maybe we should talk about that and what your understanding of Jesus meant to you in your life and dealing with other people. Is that a place you want to go?
Let's see. Okay, that's challenging. I think I have to take a peek at my notes to see how to answer that.
Well, love enemies, love those near you, love yourself, love parenting.
Yes.
Relations with other people.
I was just with a friend of mine who was judging my religion, saying it was evil.
Oh, yeah?
And I have finally learned, it took a long time, that when people tell me, because that's his religious belief, he thinks he's got the truth.
Okay.
And I have finally learned, this is just recent, a few months, maybe a month, it's not helpful to tell other people, much as I think I could be such a good, helpful teacher, to tell them why what they deeply believe is not the total truth, especially when they think it's the total truth.
Yeah.
So it was hard, but it was so much better to sit with him with an open heart, as much as an open heart, really, to say goodbye, I love you, hug him goodbye. And it was so tempting, I almost said something like, it's great to imagine this ideal bliss realm, and that's God, and then put down everybody else for not being that. There's a wonderful book called I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, where this woman just imagines life is just rosy, and then real life seems so horrible in comparison.
Right.
And I did not say that to him.
Yeah.
I feel so this is new for me, to be able to open my heart and feel love for him. It was painful.
Mm-hmm.
I was just telling Susan, who's one of our camera person before the show, that shook me up rather than fighting back.
Mm-hmm.
But that, I'm so glad. I'm scared for him because he was putting down.
Sure. But that's Jesus' whole point, isn't it? To love your enemy.
Yes.
He doesn't mean that, they're going to become your husband or wife or something like that.
No.
It just means that in order to understand where they are, you have to open yourself up in a sympathetic way to what's happening with them in their lives.
And what they need, yes.
Exactly. Like today, for example, we've got people, blowing themselves up in public places, and killing a lot of people, and everyone is like, oh my gosh, this is so outrageous, these people are so horrible, et cetera, et cetera. You've heard it all. But if you stop, perhaps, to think about why they're actually there and how they got there, then it might make a big difference in how you think about them and what they're doing. If you think about them as coming from a really horrible existence someplace where they're surrounded by war and a lot of it being caused and involving Western nations and stuff, then you can start to think, well, okay, I can kind of see how they make this connection and think that they should be fighting back, and that the way to fight back is to do the things that they're doing.
And maybe to negotiate with them.
Maybe negotiate, whatever.
Negotiate with anybody, really.
But if you don't take that step
Yep.
to try to put yourself in their shoes, then you're never going to reach that point.
Happened between the Tutsis and the Hutu in Rhodesia. They had reconciliation after, murderous genocide.
Mm-hmm.
Happened in South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Well, Nelson Mandela
Yep.
basically counseled that, because the black people in South Africa were clearly the majority.
Yep.
And could have pretty much gone on a rampage and destroyed what the white powers had created there. But he counseled them very strongly against that.
Yes.
Right? And so it wasn't a horrible disaster. And they've moved on substantially. Yeah. So let's get back to how this related to you in your own life. Are there other things that, in your interactions with other people, how has this helped you?
This is going to be an exploration to say this.
Mm-hmm.
I have discovered, you might not know on the show, that being open to the, how did I even say that? I'll say it badly. Anything worth saying is worth saying badly. So now we're entering new territory. I haven't talked about this in public or even in private. But I would try with someone with my significant other.
Mm-hmm.
I would feel uncomfortable still, as I was at the University of Chicago, and try to make the conversation something I was comfortable with, as we're doing here now, and eventually discover there's a spaciousness or a silence, like in the Quaker meeting, mm-hmm. that if I could feel that beneath, around, between the words, mm-hmm. if I could open my heart and feel that we're spacious, then the words would be part of the spaciousness, which is pretty much what Quaker meeting was saying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know yet, maybe you will, now you can be my teacher, how that directly connects to Yeshua.
Yeah, I guess I don't know.
And we both don't know.
But clearly there were a lot of things that he said that were, more specific, like love your enemy,
yes.
for example, that would apply in daily life.
I mean, it would apply to me certainly in my own psyche,
mm-hmm.
the parts that attack me.
Uh-huh.
That would be huge. My father was a fireman. You would understand this.
Yeah. So
when I left home, I imagined an axe attacking me. It was like every day for about 25 years, really.
Well, and why was that? Why was it attacking you?
In my mind, I would feel an axe wanting to chop my head off, bang into my head. Both ends of it, the blunt end and the sharp end, hit my body.
But it wasn't attacking you because you'd left home or something. It wasn't like
Maybe it was
kind
my
of a
way
revenge?
of staying home. I would eventually learn. This was maybe more Buddhist, although connected to Jeshua. Love my enemy. Love that you would understand this big time.
Yeah, yeah.
Love that part of me that feels like an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And ask it.
Yes.
Have a conversation with it. Ask, what's going on? What do you want?
Mm-hmm.
I eventually saw my father holding the axe and saw him very, 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 very lonely. And I'd ask him, what does he want? And he would say something like, and I'm creating this now, I want to get through the walls that you needed to make when you grew up in our family.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get through to them. I want to connect to you. And you're blocking me out as you blocked everyone out. And I want you to not be blocked out. I want to shatter your small ego and open it up. And this is my way of doing it. And when I hear this and understand this, I was still angry at him.
Mm-hmm.
I had to do in this show, in this room. I had to take an axe, a real axe. I brought it to the television studio, I don't know if you remember, and went, pow! To him, too. There's an old mantra, a boy becomes a man when he kills the father in him.
Mm-hmm.
And my father might have even understood this and said, okay.
Yeah.
So that, which is somewhat Buddhist, but also, like Jeshua, loving the enemies inside, helped me very much be a more whole and open person.
Well, it seems like most people probably are interested in visualizing themselves as a good person, right? And the idea that you have really bad or ugly parts in there is something that people don't really want to look at, you know? But it's real and it's there, and if you don't look at it and pay attention to it and try to accommodate it in some way or keep it under control, then it's going to come out at times when maybe you don't want it to come out.
Yes, for sure.
And and it's going to affect
So you understand that, very much so.
Yes, yes. And so if you take the approach of love your enemy to the extent where you're willing to look at the dark parts of yourself and allow them a presence in your consciousness, then you can start to go somewhere with that. You can start to deal with those things, at least be on your alert for, when those enemies are doing sneak attacks or are liable to, or things like that.
I like to think that on the cross, like this Easter Sunday is coming now, Yeshua has, like you and I, this angry side, side that moved him, even with his nonviolent revolution, to go into the temple and overturn the tables of the money changers and the chairs of the people who sell doves. The Gospel of Mark is really specific about which was the tables and which was the chairs. I love Mark for that. And so he had that understandable angry side, growing up being called a bastard by the people in this community, even with the beautiful story and love from Joseph to Miriam.
Well, he must have thought that what was his specific issues with the money changers in the temple?
He wanted it to be, he didn't want people to be doing things like nowadays, like playing bingo in church. He wanted it to be a place of prayer.
Okay.
So I imagine him on the cross, which is not an easy place to be. I mean, in Christianity, many of us feel this often.
Yeah.
And he has this angry side and this loving side, and he connects them. And he has this one sentence, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing.
Right.
Which is both angry, you don't know what you're doing, and loving.
Yes.
I had one friend who I told this to when she was having trouble with one of her friends, and she said to her friend, I forgive you because you don't know what you're doing. And her friend didn't talk to her for years. But it's an attempt to really marry your angry self and your loving self. What we would now call a tough love, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I think he even did this with God the Father.
Yeah.
We have time or not?
Yes, we do. We got a couple more minutes.
Good.
We have a question
Yep.
brought in by somebody else, and that is, what was up with Jesus? There's kind of like a middle part of his life that we don't know much about. So
Yep.
from the time he was like a teenager, say, until, well, I don't know exactly what years, but
I think he spoke about it.
what was up
Stories
with him
like
then?
the prodigal son,
Uh-huh.
which is a beautiful story. The son goes and spends his inheritance, lives with the swine,
Uh-huh.
is so hungry that he has to go back to his family and saying, I was eating the food for the pigs, I'm back again, I spent the inheritance. And I think that, I at least like to think he was talking about his own life in these stories.
But how much do we actually know about
We don't know.
that period?
We don't
really
know.
much.
We would have to look at his, you tell stories about, we look at his parables
Yeah.
and say, hey, what if they were true of his experiences?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might be a good beginning way to answer that.
All right. I think we have like about a minute left in the show.
I wanted to say,
So,
may
yeah.
I,
Yeah.
that his tough love, combining anger and love, he was able to love what he experienced as the spirit of the Jewish people, which was both an angry God and a loving God. The Lord is my shepherd. And he was able to love that too, the way Joseph loved Miriam, love his God. And I think he changed his God the way Joseph changed Miriam and Yeshua to be a way more loving presence that we can even feel when we're loving our shadow, by saying, even though you're killing me, I will love you anyway.
Okay. And as like in the Old Testament, God was a more angry God, maybe,
At times,
and then a more loving God.
And more loving us.
So we're on our way out. We have to say goodnight. I just want to thank you so much
Oh,
for
thank
being on the
you.
show
You were
tonight.
such a good interviewer. You were so good to talk with.